Hello, Goddess Garden Book Club family. We are wrapping up our Black History Month reading challenge journey, and I want to give you a heartfelt thank you for taking this journey with me. This has been such a great time. Putting this collection together has been transformative. I hope that you found some great books that you can enjoy in your library, and I'm certainly glad that I was able to share this with you. So, we're about to dive into February 28th selection, Hood Feminism by MIKKI Kendall. I hope you enjoy this book, and I hope you stay tuned throughout the year. Like, subscribe, hit the notification button. We have a lot more books coming. I have so much more to share with you. But for 28 days, we have been hitting it every single day. So if I slow down a little in March, don't hold me. But again, I will be back. And thank you so much for going along this journey with me.
Hello and welcome, fellow readers, to this cultural deep dive of Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot, by MIKKI Kendall, narrated by MIKKI Kendall herself. Thank you for being a part of this incredible journey and challenge. Book number 28 on our list is where we'll wrap up February's exploration, and I couldn't be more excited to dive into this powerful read with all of you. Before we get into the deep dive, I want to point out something special. On the final page, you'll notice a book that wasn't included in these discussions, but I highly encourage you to check it out for more thought-provoking material. Now let's get into the heart of this book. Kendall's work is a sharp critique of mainstream feminism, especially how it often leaves behind women from marginalized communities. This book doesn't just challenge the status quo of feminist movements, but invites us to examine our biases and understand the realities of women who often don't fit the mainstream narrative. Here are some key narrative points you should definitely take note of as we journey through Hood feminism. Kendall emphasizes how true feminism must be intersectional, incorporating race, class, and other identities that are often overlooked. She challenges the notion that feminism is only for those with privilege, urging us to broaden the conversation. Kendall also points out how the mainstream feminist movement has often failed to address the needs of marginalized women, especially those from low-income communities or women of color. She stresses the significance of grassroots activism and the work being done by these often unsung heroines. Economic disparity is one of the key issues Kendall focuses on, making a compelling argument about the need for economic justice for all women, not just the privileged few. Kendall also shines a light on the ways women, especially Black women, experience violence, both within their communities and from systemic structures. Her raw, honest accounts are crucial for understanding the depth of this issue. As we dive deeper into MIKKI Kendall's Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot, it's important to contextualize her critiques within the larger feminist movements, especially the suffrage movement of the past and the #MeToo movement of the present. These movements, though monumental, have not been fully inclusive of women of color, and Kendall challenges us to confront that reality. Let's unpack these historical and contemporary feminist movements and how they have or haven't included the narratives of women of color. First, the suffrage movement in the United States, which culminated in the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote in 1920, was an undeniable milestone for women's rights. However, it's crucial to recognize that the suffrage movement was largely led by white, middle to upper class women, and its primary focus was securing political rights for women like them. This, unfortunately, left behind many women of color who were fighting for a broader set of rights and had to contend with both sexism and racism. While white suffragists were marching for the vote, many Black women, Indigenous women, and other women of color were simultaneously fighting for racial equality, often at great personal cost. For Black women, voting rights were not just about casting a ballot. It was about overcoming the additional hurdles of disenfranchisement through voter suppression, literacy tests, and intimidation. This meant that for women of color, the suffrage movement wasn't enough to secure the kind of equality they needed. They required not only the right to vote, but also the resources, protections from violence, and economic opportunities that were often denied to them because of their race or class. Many women of color, such as Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth, and Mary Church Terrell, were active in the fight for suffrage, but their stories and contributions were often sidelined in mainstream feminist narratives. As Kendall highlights in Hood Feminism, the suffrage movement failed to be truly inclusive because it prioritized the concerns of a certain group of women, neglecting the broader intersections of race, class, and economic justice. The hashtag #MeToo movement, which gained widespread attention in 2017, highlighted the pervasive nature of sexual harassment and assault, particularly in the workplace. This movement, led by women like Tarana Burke, who originally coined the term in 2006, gave a platform to women's voices and called attention to the systemic abuse of power by powerful men. However, while hashtag #MeToo brought vital attention to the realities of sexual violence, its initial rise was not inclusive of women of color, believing that the overall message was inclusive. In the early days of hashtag #MeToo, the narrative was consumed predominantly by white women, particularly those in Hollywood, who had the resources and platform to share their stories. Women of color often felt left out of the conversation. Their stories were less likely to be heard or validated, and when they did speak out, they were often dismissed or minimized. The realities that women of color faced in terms of sexual violence were often framed differently, where, for example, Black women were disproportionately affected by sexual violence. Their experiences were neglected in favor of those of white middle class women. Kendall critiques this gap in inclusion in Hood feminism. She calls attention to how mainstream feminist movements, including hashtag #MeToo, have often been blind to the intersectionality of race and class. Women of color who are part of marginalized communities often face compounded forms of discrimination, making their experiences of sexual harassment or assault different from those of their white counterparts. Kendall argues that true feminism, and by extension, hashtag #MeToo, must acknowledge and address the overlapping struggles that Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color face. Both movements have made contributions to feminist discourse. They have also demonstrated the limitations of feminist movements when they fail to be fully inclusive. Kendall's Hood, feminism asks us to consider a more inclusive feminist movement, one that accounts for intersecting identities. She pushes us to broaden the conversation to include the voices of women who have historically been excluded from mainstream feminist dialogues. By recognizing the gaps in these movements, we can start to reclaim feminism in a way that is inclusive of all women. Kendall calls for a feminism that truly serves the most marginalized, those who have often been forgotten or ignored. This means addressing economic inequality, fighting for equal access to resources, and ensuring that the voices of Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color are amplified. Hood feminism challenges us to make feminism more than a movement for some, it must be a movement for all women. This is the crucial work of expanding the feminist narrative to include all voices, to recognize all struggles, and to build a future where no woman is forgotten. I hope that this novel helps us all imagine equity as a right. Thank you for enjoying this journey. Stay connected because there's much more coming from the garden. See you soon.